The easiest thing to do is to despair. If you told me right now that you find the state of the world unbearable, that there seems to be endless misery and suffering, that the world seems to be heading towards doom, then I would find it hard to disagree with you. And if you told me that in addition to the sense of global doom, you also feel despair at your personal circumstances, whether it be because of illness, heartbreak, or financial troubles, then I would believe you. And if you told me that this leaves you depressed and anxious, hopeless and without joy, then I would understand you. So what can we do? How could we possibly cope with all that suffering and despair? Well, one way to deal with it is to dive head first into action, to try to improve the world and alleviate some of the misery we see, whether it's in other people's lives or in our very own life. Indeed, this is the path that many people take. We adopt ideologies and we join groups which provide us with some kind of actionable path. They give us something to do and somewhere to go. We are therefore shown a way out of our despair, and we gain, at very least, some amount of hope. Of course, there's nothing wrong with this kind of approach. If we can have some kind of positive impact on the world at large by engaging in useful action, why not go for it? Well, the problem is twofold. For one, our action, when it is driven by despair, is very often unlikely to be coming from a place of wisdom. Instead, what is likely to happen is that our despair will turn into panic and anger. And if these are the emotional drivers from which we are operating, can we be sure that our engagement, even though it has a good intention at its heart, won't do more harm than good? But when it comes to dealing with our sense of despair, there's another, even more fundamental problem. We can very easily discover that engaging in productive action alone does not necessarily alleviate our sense of despair. The reason for this is quite simple. Even though we might notice the positive effect we have on the world and other people, we might also notice that what we can effectively change is merely a drop of goodness into the bucket of misery. We can see quite easily that even when our orientation to the world seems to be a good one, we are always fighting an uphill battle. Years of building can seem fruitless when we consider the damage that can be done in one single day. Even the good we can produce seems to be meaningless in contrast to everything that is broken. It should therefore not surprise us that for many of us the solution is this: detachment. Because we understand that we cannot change the world at large, we subsequently decide to change our own orientation towards it. In order not to get hurt by our own despair, we simply decide not to care. On some level, it is easy to see how this shift in attitude is a natural reaction. After all, what is there to despair about if I just don't care about the state of the world either way? What this amounts to for many people is a state of being where we don't despair about the state of the world, but we likewise also seem to live in a state of great meaninglessness. Yes, nothing really matters. But nothing really matters. There's no despair, but neither is there profundity. There is not much suffering, but neither is there much joy. In order not to experience the highs and lows of over-involvement, we entered a state of constant low-level depression. So what, then, is the resolution to this dilemma? Is there a way of being which does not fall into the trap of anxious over-involvement or defeated detachment? Well, the short answer is yes. Emphatically yes. But before we talk about this alternative way of being, I have to give you a slight warning. Up to this point, everything I said more or less made sense. I tried my best to be coherent and lay out the pros and cons of over-involvement and detachment. But the place where I'm going to point you now will not be one you can make sense of. It is a space which utterly transcends all of our conventional definitions. And yet, beautifully, this space, which will always exceed our mind's grasp, is not separate from our ordinary human life. It should not surprise us that the ultimate solution to our human predicament of despair is one that seems paradoxical. As the saying goes, you cannot solve a problem with the same mind that created it. And despite the paradoxical nature of the solution, it can be very helpful to initially have a clear direction to go in, which will then eventually lead us to this resolution of our despair. This initial direction, which will be our guide, takes the shape of a beautiful, simple, and ultimately profound question. Who is aware? We become interested in the one who is aware of experience. We might have an awful lot of doubts about what we are experiencing, but the fact that we are experiencing is true beyond the shadow of a doubt. Now, it is only a matter of becoming interested in the one who is aware of experience. This move of shifting our interest to the one who is aware might seem counterintuitive at first. After all, we have spent almost all of our lives exclusively being interested in what we are experiencing in all its various forms, instead of being curious about who is having those experiences. But despite this inquiry seeming unusual at first, it is very much worth undertaking. So again, I simply ask, who is aware? And where do we find the one who is aware? No matter where we look, we can never actually find the one who is experiencing. Yet despite this not finding, awareness is clearly here and is aware of experience. Awareness is here, but as it turns out, there is no one who is aware. So what then is this awareness? Does this awareness have a location, a place where it resides as some kind of separate witness of experience? Such a place cannot be found. Instead, awareness is space-like. It is not in any place, but simply here, open and receiving all experience. And does this awareness have a shape, size, or color? I cannot discover any objective characteristics of this awareness. It forever eludes all my attempts to conceptualize it. And if this failure to locate awareness seems frustrating, then we can relax and rest easy, because this failure is not a failure at all. Awareness is simply not an object of experience. We will never be able to find it and grab hold of it. And yet, paradoxically, despite never being able to find this awareness, it simply is this which we are. This unidentifiable awareness is the same ordinary awareness which is hearing my voice right now and seeing this image right now. So what then is it like to be this awareness? To be no one, nowhere, and yet to be aware? To put it very simply, this is completeness. This is wholeness. This is peace itself. This is the groundless place that despair cannot touch. And what is truly beautiful is that this awareness provides true completeness without falling into a state of nihilistic detachment. On the contrary, this awareness, while ultimately not affected by any experience, also has no way of shutting itself off from our very human emotions. This is not a state of subdued neutrality. We can still be touched by what we are experiencing. Everything can still be felt. Every thought can still arise. But when these waves of emotion, which we usually deem to be so problematic, are seen from this awareness, instead of from the position of an imaginary someone, they shine in a different light. These intense emotions can be held with a totally different capacity and grace. Now at this point, you might have a certain concern. You might think that if you access this awareness and experience the completeness of being no one, this would somehow prevent you from engaging with the world at large, and thus having an actual positive impact on the lives of other people. Of course, this is an understandable concern, but luckily, we need not worry. It turns out that living from this awareness does not leave us uncaring and unwilling to be helpful to other people. On the contrary, we find that compassionate engagement naturally flowers out of this awareness. And since we are no longer being suffocated by this sense of despair, a whole lot of energy is naturally freed up and made available. Very often, simply being with someone as this awareness is the greatest service we can provide them with. But when we do engage with the world, our action is no longer driven by neurotic anxiety. Our involvement does not come from the sense of being a separate someone who is trying to impose limited ideals onto the world and very often achieves the opposite of what is desired. Instead, if action arises out of this completeness, it will have a totally different flavor and impact. There is no rigid agenda. Action begins to express a natural wisdom that is tailored dynamically in the moment as each new situation presents itself. And yet, this does not preclude us from making plans either. All the conventional functioning of our minds is still there, but it can now happen without all the unnecessary neurotic fixation we usually add on top of it. All of this, of course, is not something to just believe in. Simply come and see for yourself. Come and see what the true nature of being is, and surely you will not be disappointed. Most likely, this transformation of living from awareness is not something that will happen all at once, but a complete transformation is not necessary. Each glimpse of this awareness is a moment of total completeness. And that total completeness will take care of our despair in a way which we couldn't have imagined. So come to this total rest and awareness and enjoy your life exactly as it's presenting itself.